So with that, I am going to introduce our keynote speaker, who is going to discuss NHLBI's vision for advancing innovation and transformative role through AI. And so I'm honored to introduce Dr. Blanca Himes, who is the Senior Advisor for Data Science here at the NHLBI, and is also a tenured professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and has done pioneer work leveraging biomedical informatics and large data sets to better understand asthma and respiratory disease. So Blanca, good morning and welcome, and thank you for taking time out of your day to be with us at the Catalyze program.
Thank you. Happy to be here. And perhaps I'll try to share my screen. Yeah, does that sound good, Marissa?
That would be great, Blanca, yes. And I have a copy of your slides in case something goes awry.
Okay. Does that work okay?
Perfect.
Now that I can't see anybody, but that's great. So I'm really grateful to be here, and I will, as Mike just said, my name is Blanca Himes. I'm a Senior Advisor for Data Science at the NHLBI. That is a new role, a new position. I started in December of last year, and I'm just here to tell you a little bit about supporting the future of translational research here at NHLBI, but I also have some examples of work that we think are exciting in the space of AI and its relationship to translational research. So first, as I'm sure everybody knows, AI is transforming healthcare, business, and government in many ways. As you probably saw in the government too, we actually all just got accounts, at least in Health and Human Services, to ChatGPT. We're really trying to think about how to use AI both for our day-to-day work, but also strategize about how it can be useful for research and for healthcare. We definitely are expanding opportunities for faster biomedical discovery, and I'll say a little bit more about that, and how NHLBI is driving translation of AI into health impact. So first, we've made a few changes to our people. One of those changes was hiring somebody like me into a role of Senior Advisor for Data Science, but NHLBI does have a team focused on data science and precision medicine. Dr. David Goff became our Deputy Director for Precision Medicine and Data Science at the end of last year. We have a new Chief Information Officer, and we have various subject matter experts who do know about AI, but more broadly, data science. Some of the ones shown here on this slide, but also others who are not there. And this does show commitment because I think historically, a lot of the institutes who were maybe more disease focused did not have data science and precision medicine or AI sort of front and center as part of their mission. But I think increasingly we're all recognizing the importance of AI for everything. And so these positions are sort of being put in and into the strategic vision, and that includes changing personnel in the institutes to make sure that we take it into account, as opposed to just outsourcing that to some of the other institutes whose mission has always been to improve informatics, data science, and so on. In terms of NHLBI funding in AI, I'm not going to give you guys a full report, but I did want to mention that some of the areas of growth you will not be surprised to hear about, right? And this is since 2020. So in AI, we're including things like machine learning and deep learning. A lot of the grants that were part of the portfolio focused on those areas had to do with cardiovascular risk stratification. And when I say in the past, I mean they still do, but since then we've seen a growth in these particular areas. So cardiovascular risk stratification with ECG, CT scan, and other imaging data, resuscitation and out-of-hospital cardiac care arrest analytics, COPD and interstitial lung disease subtyping with imaging and omics data, and critical care decision support, although some of the critical care decision support we share with other institutes. But I would say these are the 4 areas where we've seen the most application, partly because these lend themselves and we have the desire to do prediction, but also we have the appropriate maybe data and to support the efforts. But there's certainly a lot of growth, and some of the areas that are relatively not as in depth, or their presence is not as widespread in our grant portfolio, have to do with prospective validation of the predictive models in different settings to ensure generalizability. I think that's pretty much a theme of predictive models, period, and it speaks to their subsequent implementation in clinical care, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. Sleep medicine AI, there could be more there. Non-imaging digital biomarkers, I think imaging is one of the technologies where perhaps it was easier to label images and therefore try to think about how to use deep learning with it. But there's certainly other types of data that we could use AI and or machine learning with. And more broadly, improved explainability, bias audits, post-market performance tracking, all of these things that we want, and we increasingly realize how important they are to be able to take our models and or devices that use these models back into where they can be at the point of care or changing healthcare more directly with patients. So beyond the grant portfolio, we do have a new initiative. It's called the NHLBI AI-Enabled Precision Medicine Initiative for Heart, Lung, Blood, and Sleep Health, or NHLBI AI for short. And this is an initiative funded through the other Translational Authority, similar to you guys in your Catalyze program. And its goals are to develop AI models to transform discovery in heart, lung, blood, and sleep research, provide high-value machine-readable biomedical data sets in secure environments, and advanced deep phenotyping and systems biology to uncover heart, lung, blood, and sleep mechanisms and treatment targets. For now, there's $56 million in projected funding over 5 years. There may be even more if we have the scientific need and the budget. That is sort of to be determined. But again, this shows like financial commitment to the space of AI. And partly why this is an other transaction authority is because this area is moving quickly. So we don't want to wait for traditional grant mechanisms to bring in more AI into the Institute. And I've listed the website there, which mostly has details on some of the current funding availability. So this initiative has a structure that is perhaps a little complicated looking. I'm just going to go through the components that we've envisioned will be part of it and then tell you about where things stand with it. First, we have an AI Coordinating Center, and the idea of that is just to be the administrative hub and try to oversee some of the financials and all of that related to the entire initiative. There will be an AI Data Science Center, and the idea here is to offer collaborative scientific leadership, help create, evaluate, and deploy AI tools and models that can perhaps be used broadly, review security protocols and aids in the development and application of ethical standards for AI tools, and assist in coordinating strategies to merge data tools and insights from all of the other components so that they can hopefully be reused and helpful both to the entire initiative, but hopefully also beyond the initiative. We have a Precision Medicine Coordinating Center, and this is another one of the components that will offer collaborative scientific leadership. This center will provide program management support and subject matter expertise for modular precision medicine research programs that I'll get to in a minute. But the idea here is that this center will help guide extant data harmonization, prospective data standardization and management so that it's more amenable to AI, and also provide precision medicine experience and expertise in the domain areas of the heart, lung, and blood and sleep, which are the ones of our institute. We have individual AI research projects. Those are a little bit more like your traditional research projects. Their goal will be to develop novel AI methods and tools to empower transformative discovery research, improve patient and or community care, and or community health, the outcome of which is applicable to the study of health and disease involving heart, lung, blood, and sleep. You can see that there's always this emphasis on we do heart, lung, blood, and sleep. And we anticipate that multiple awards will be made. We don't know exactly how many, but perhaps around 10. Modular precision medicine research programs are a little bit different in scope than the individual AI research projects. These will probably just focus on a handful of disease areas or topics, and they will be larger scale efforts to gather new data. So they will conduct research to analyze extant data, characterize preclinical and clinical disease trajectories, develop or deeply phenotype conditions, identify potential subphenotypes, elucidate underlying mechanisms, and identify prioritized potential risk factors, prevention strategies, and druggable targets. It is not necessarily the case that a program will do every single one of those things, but it will be some combination of them that is driven by the nature of what each program focuses on. So that is the whole structure, and I will tell you about the status of each of these components. Our coordinating center was established in fiscal year 24. We have applications for the AI Data Science Center and individual AI research projects that are currently under review, and we're looking to get the AI Data Science Center up and running, hopefully by the end of this year. And shortly after, we'll have some of our individual AI research projects start. For the Precision Medicine Coordinating Center, there is an open solicitation now, and you can find it at the website below. For our modular research or precision medicine research programs, of which there will probably be a handful, we have a few research opportunity announcements that are under development. So actually one of them should be out before too long. So you can look forward to those in the near future, and maybe some of those will be in areas that are applicable to you. And if not, maybe stay tuned for future ones as well. Okay, so that's a little bit about our funding. And now I wanted to talk about advancing translational science with AI. These are sort of personally selected papers, and maybe think about if any of you guys, as we move forward, have your favorite illustrative examples of how AI is helping with translational science. We're welcome to hear those. If we don't have time today, just by all means, reach out and send an email. Tell us about it later, or we'll discuss them during the meeting today. But I'm sure you all recognize this diagram. This is the Catalyze components. And if you look at almost all of these boxes, you can think about how AI can help improve these processes, or somehow can contribute to moving across the spectrum, but also doing each of these steps better. And also the steps that are not shown here, which are even more on the basic science side, and then beyond the clinical trials and just being in the clinic and having things in healthcare, in a healthcare setting. So let's start with how AI is accelerating drug discovery. AI models, I'm sure you're all aware, have been used especially for predicting protein folding. Some would say that's already like a closed problem, like we're done with it. Even though it had been a problem for decades, we finally got to the point where we can maybe solve it. Predicting binding sites, inferring pharmacological profiles, all of those things are being done so much more efficiently now. And here is one example of this. This is a recent study by a group who has been trying to do antibiotic design for quite some time, but more recently, they're expanding to use generative, or to include generative AI into their process. So in this case, it's deep learning, but with some de novo antibiotic design. So in contrast to the past, where maybe you're doing design based on a pre-screened library that exists, now we can maybe think about all of the chemicals that we have no characterization about, right? And just do very different structures and explore a much larger chemical space to think about, will this drug work, yes or no? So here's their graphical abstract, and they started out with 2 different strategies to build compounds, which again are different strategies than those of the past. They started screening 45 million fragments with neural networks as one strategy. Another strategy was a de novo generation based on very simple molecules or no starting point. Then they expanded these fragments with variational autoencoders, and of course, a lot more steps. I'm oversimplifying what they did, but they essentially expanded to have over 36 million compounds, which, as those of you who have heard of drug discovery, that's a lot of compounds to explore computationally. It's more than one would traditionally do. Of those, they did further screening, and they eventually synthesized 24 candidate compounds. 7 of them showed selective antibacterial activity. And of those, they subsequently identified 2 that had strong selective activity against gonorrhea and Staph aureus. What's really interesting about these is that they're structurally distinct from existing antibiotics because of how they started, sort of not with libraries that have similar chemicals and compounds to those we already know, but again, they were able to explore and come up with some very different types of antibiotics based on structure, also based on their mechanism of action, which is perhaps not surprising because they were structurally distinct. So showing not just that they have 2 leads that might help, and by the way, this is Staph aureus, they also say or are showing that it may work against MRSA, which is an important clinical problem too. So this is showing both 2 potential compounds that may be great, that later experiments in this paper showed that they worked in mouse models of infection. But it also has this proof of concept that maybe we can accelerate drug discovery and just come up with completely novel compounds for other conditions as well. So second is agentic AI to accelerate scientific discovery. And I put this one in there. It has a little bit to do with process, but also increasingly with science itself. So generative AI systems like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini are increasingly used to assist scientists. I'm sure you guys have used them in some way in your own life to help you. Maybe some of you guys are actually naysayers and refuse to, but I'd say most of us probably have used them in some way to assist us with some specific uses. But increasingly, people are trying to say, well, can we make a specialized biomedical AI agent to conduct research autonomously, at least research that can be done in a computational system? So far, we haven't replaced, of course, doing experiments, doing things at the point of care with people. But maybe we can still autonomously conduct research that's computational in nature. So one example of a specialized biomedical AI agent, and this is a preprint rather than a peer-reviewed paper, but it still is quite interesting, is Biomni, a general purpose biomedical AI agent. They have a place where you can try it for yourself and see what you think. But in this paper, what they did is they first went through and rather than use ChatGPT or Gemini or something that just is sort of enriched with all kinds of background information, it's sort of this feeling like, no, we should try to use expert curated information to focus our agent on things that are vetted more carefully for science. So they ingested a whole bunch of papers from bioRxiv. They also looked through software and databases that are vetted by scientists, some specialized tools, and they didn't focus on all of science, but they took certain domains. And so here in this slide, you guys might see some of them like genomics, genetics. So for example, in genetics, they might say like, what are the traditional databases and software that is validated by scientists in genetics, and then try to feed that and make this agentic environment that is to focus the exploration in vetted tools and data. And once they have that, then they can try to create the agentic architecture, which of course is based on LLMs, general LLMs, but they have retrieval augmented planning and code-based execution, meaning it's not just showing computer code to look through databases and gather information, but actually develop the code, execute it, and then in the end, give back a full report based on a query. So that sounds nice. Like, does it actually work? And they show validation against some of the existing tools that are out there to validate computational experiments, as well as some of the simple searches. So saying like, try to find the genetic variant that is causal in this region, which is a simpler task, and compare that to what a person or an expert would assess after doing their work by hand. But they also show some real world biomedical workflows as case studies. So I would say they're not suggesting that the results of these are publishable as is. They mentioned that they might be hypothesis generating, but just to illustrate the ability of their system is they might give a query like uncover biologically meaningful thermogenic patterns, and that's the full query. And then they upload 458 Excel files containing wearable glucose monitoring and temperature data for 30 participants. So a little bit of dense data. They don't have to explain themselves too much. They just give this to the agent and see what happens. And what they get back in return is sort of a full report. Some of the patterns that were found were patterns that one would expect. And so, yeah, it looks nice. Then they extended that further by saying, and now analyze a whole bunch of multiomics data. And here I'm specifically listing out what that multiomics data was. So lipidomic, metabolomic, and proteomic features for the same participants. The agent was able to analyze each type of multiomics data and then create an updated report with new insights or new hypothetical insights and so on. So it looks great. And they also, this is just like one aspect of, or one particular case study, but like I said, they have different types of biology, which sounds very exciting. And this day and age, at least, I would say this is better than what a general agent like, or not even an agent, but a general system like ChatGPT can do. May be the case in the future that one of those sort of larger companies will be able to do all of this, but for now, we're probably better off with some type of retrieval augmented generation where we have vetted data that agents or AI is looking through to try to do this type of scientific discovery autonomously. In terms of clinical devices, of course, AI is very helpful there. And I know some of you actually probably use this in your research. So brain-computer interfaces, adaptive cardiac devices, and wearables are examples where the better the AI is, the better the device may be. And so one example that I like here is, again, not heart, blood, lung, and sleep, but related to brain, where it's sort of on the borderline of science fiction, or at least what science fiction for those of us who are as old as I am. And here's just an example of using a BCI that can decode inner speech, and shown only in 4 participants with paralysis or severe speech. But when I say only, this is sort of a very specialized group of participants. And so through the device, they were able to capture inner speech. So as people are trying, right, to not just attempt speech, which is trying to physically say things, even though they can't actually do it biologically, they still can capture inner speech. They go on to show that private inner speech can be distinguished, which is important because, right, we can have a device in our brain that can just monitor or report what our private inner speech is. And so, of course, AI plays a role here in various ways. So first, we need some kind of AI or machine learning to decode the signals that are going into the chip itself. From there, LLMs have made a lot of difference in able to being to change whatever is decoded into actual plain language that we can understand, which is kind of what we need if we're going to have devices that can do speech efficiently. And they also use machine learning to try to distinguish inner speech from that's private from inner speech that you might be attempting to use to communicate to the outside world. So very exciting, and it's kind of clear how AI is so important for devices like this that are that can be used in clinical practice should they be translated appropriately. But that being said, and I'm sure you guys are aware of this, clinical adoption of medical AI devices has been relatively slow. An illustrative paper here is this one. It's a few years old now, but it showed that clinical adoption of medical AI devices is slow by looking through US insurance claims. So they found that of 500 FDA cleared AI devices, only 4 were widely adopted. And their definition of widely adopted was that they had over 10,000 claims. The top 2 categories of those devices were coronary artery disease detection, so heart, lung, blood, and sleep, with 67,000 claims, and diabetic retinopathy with 15,000 claims. So that leaves a lot of devices that maybe they exist and they're cleared, but they haven't quite gotten to the point of care, and at least not widespread clinical care. The adoption of these devices was highest in wealthier urban areas and academic centers, which is perhaps not surprising, but that still begs the question of how can all of these things be more widely adopted? For that, I'll let all of my colleagues who work in this space give you solutions. I have no solutions, but we actually are aware of this problem, and I'm sure many of you guys sort of live through this problem, and it is one of the things that you're facing as you're trying to translate your own devices. So translating AI into clinical practice, we can say safely that creating AI models is a lot easier than proving their clinical utility, right? Any of us can take a data set and just like make a model and show maybe within our own data set that it's quite efficient. That doesn't mean it's going to be clinically useful. These days, example here that many of you have probably heard about, at least those of you who work in healthcare, is that, or in a clinical setting, is that Epic some years back deployed to hundreds of hospitals a proprietary sepsis prediction model based on 400,000 encounters in 3 hospitals between 2013 and 2015, which means that if you're a health system, your Epic installation just included this model, and they were trying to be helpful, and they had validated the model in these 3 hospitals, and it seemed to work quite well. But other health systems started to wonder about the utility of the model, and eventually a series of papers were published. One of the first ones was this at University of Michigan. They did independent tests and they found really poor performance. So the model identified only 7% of patients with sepsis who did not receive timely antibiotics, which is quite low and showing that it was barely useful at all for the task of the model. The model missed 67% of sepsis cases, and it had a high false positive rate. So this was one of those papers that really got people thinking like, whoa, not so fast. Don't just try to like plop in machine learning and artificial intelligence models into clinical care without being fully validated. And what exactly does fully validated mean? That, of course, has evolved in time the more that we've learned about this. But this did set a precedent for a lot of skepticism, I would say, among some people at the point of care and clinicians about how do we really need these machine learning models, and are they really going to be helpful, or are they just going to bring in a lot of noise and not really help us detect who we need to detect? So an exemplar, I would say, of building a generalizable AI model. There are other examples out there, but I would say this work by Regina Barcelay and others on trying to predict breast cancer risk from mammography is quite impressive. They're trying to predict breast cancer these days, they would say 5 years prior to incidence based on mammogram images and clinical data. Their original paper, the one that I've shown here, they used data from 3 health systems, one in the US, one in Sweden, and one in Taiwan. So pretty different data. Their model has since been validated in 2 additional US sites, one in Israel and one in Brazil. So again, showing applicability in a lot of different places, quite different health systems, different patients, and sort of different settings. They're currently validating in 72 hospitals from 22 countries. Again, sort of showing that it is possible to create a generalizable AI model. And the authors of this paper and others have sort of come up with things that we need to think about for making things generalizable. And some may have given this advice before these papers, but this is really showing some of the things that we need to do. So one is really to test models across heterogeneous populations, institutional settings, device types, if that's applicable to your model, et cetera. So in their case, like maybe it matters what type of scanner doing the mammogram is being used, right? And so they're just trying to look for bring in the most heterogeneous data possible, which is different. Really come up with something that is a model. But now we're going in the other direction, right? We just want to throw in everything in there. And if your model happens to work, then that really showing that you have a good model. Collaborate with physicians from initiation of AI model development. And maybe that sounds like common sense to some of you, but surprisingly, it doesn't happen in many instances. Physicians obviously have subject matter expertise, but then they can also guide through thinking about what is the clinical use case and what are the important problems to address at the point of care. And stress testing the models. So this has to do with like thinking about who the populations that you're using it on. But now there's also mathematical ways that you might stress test the models and use some kind of adversarial approach. Do whatever you can, instead of just assuming your model is pretty good, do what you can to stress it and make sure, try to uncover bias on your own instead of waiting to try to prove it and then finding that out sort of downstream. Okay, so conclusions. AI can transform biomedical science and clinical care. There's so many examples of how that is possible these days. Ensuring generalizability and fostering clinical adoption remain key challenges to getting these models to translate. And NHLBI is committed to supporting translational science through initiatives like NHLBI AI. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen so that I can come back and perhaps we have a little bit of time to talk. There we go. Stop share.
We sure do. Thank you so much, Dr. Himes. That was a great presentation. Mike, I see you come off. I see you came off mute. If you want to start question and answer, that would be great. We have about 20 minutes.
Great. So thanks, Blanca. I'm just wondering from your perspective, like what's the adoption of AI usage among researchers? Like, how do we get more folks to get involved, I guess?
I think on the research side, there's no problem. I think a lot of people, well, I guess, who are you talking? There's a lot of researchers, but I would say there's a lot of research.
So I'm thinking from the NHLBI's perspective, right? So from the NHLBI perspective, are we doing anything to help encourage investigators to adopt AI or our AI tools as far as training goes, or is
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say we do have training efforts into that, but are those trainings widespread, yes or no? That's certainly one of the goals of NHLBI is to think about that. And I guess relatedly, with this whole agentic AI space, right? Like people are trying, we are trying to think, like a lot of people propose, and these days is like, what we need is agentic AI that can help, let's say, biologists, right? So do biologists really need to hire a data scientist or like learn data science themselves? Or are we at the point where we can just have agentic AI sort of cover that for people? And can you trust it enough, right? I would say, well, if you're just building a hypothesis, then it's like it's sort of low risk, right? I mean, maybe your experiments are going to be really expensive, but it's lower risk from that standpoint to say, like, I did my analysis through agentic AI and this is what I got, and now I'm going to validate it. So hopefully it worked well enough that you're going to get some true hits. And I think there are a lot of efforts in that space. But I think we need a lot of validation before all biologists feel comfortable with that, right? But I would say, yeah, there are physicians too who have their own data, and they're like, I'm just going to try this agent to, and like not necessarily the ones that I showed, but I'm just going to try analyzing my data with ChatGPT. So yeah, we're not formally giving guidance people of like, do this or don't do this, but we are trying to think about how to incorporate it into our training. And NHLBI is thinking about that, right? Like, should no code, low code AI be part of our efforts to try to get sort of democratize AI use among all kinds of scientists? Does that answer your question a little bit?
I think so. Yeah, thanks. So we have a few questions in the chat. So one is, does NHLBI AI have recommendations on how to, speaking of security level, how to implement the security level? We're working with agents, but do not want to be security experts.
Yeah, so security is a big thing. I'm sure everybody's aware. So we have guidance. So one of the guidance is that it's a formal guidance that is out there right now. For example, is that we can't use genetics data. And when I say we, I mean the NIH, right? We can't use genetics data with agentic AI. There's other types of data as well, but data that possibly could be used to identify people. We certainly can't put personally identifiable data out into an outside system, but data like genetics can't be used as well, right? Like that's, even if you build a model in a private environment and then export the model, there's sort of this risk that the model might have in it data that could be used by somebody to re-identify participants. And so there are strict limits around that, which is a barrier, right? Because, okay, maybe I create an amazing agentic AI, but I can't deploy it because I'm restricted to use it only in this particular leak-proof environment. So there is a lot of ongoing work, I would say, NIH-wide to think about how can we have these leak-proof environments to create models and do training and testing. But eventually, if we're going to move those models out into healthcare, we have to think about how that's going to happen, right? Like, is it okay to transport it from one leak-proof environment to another one, or how will that happen? But yeah, security is absolutely a very important consideration now, and it is something that is built into our like the application or what we want in applicants of NHLBI is to think about these security considerations.
Thanks for that. Okay, so let's see if I can keep up. They're starting to come in. That's good. Let's see. So the next one is, for clinical AI, are there new clinical trials required each time the model underlying data and ways update? This seems like a blocker. And Jeremy, if I didn't capture everything you want, you can come off mute and just expand on that question.
Yeah, I would say, based on what you asked, like there's a few things in there to consider, right? And one is like, are you constantly update, like this is part of the learning health system, are you constantly improving the models, and then do you have to do a new clinical trial each time? Like at what time is like the model that you tested may eventually keep improving, and then do you have to keep doing a clinical trial? I can't answer that question, but it is a good question. And you know what I've noticed in the literature of people with AI and healthcare is that there are so many papers out there that are position papers or review, or let's be careful with, bias in the models, lack of generalizability. And some of those may have been by early efforts of just like putting models of the papers that I've seen out there, like position papers and review papers, rather than clinical trials of AI, right? Like I think we're relatively slow because a clinical trial is still a clinical trial. Like it's going to cost a lot of money. It has to be done. It sort of requires so many resources. And now with AI, there's even more things to consider, like what you just alluded to, which is if you keep updating your model, like, is it better to keep an inferior model that went through the clinical trial? Or if you know that your model improved, is it okay to use the better model?
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think the FDA will probably be coming up with additional guidance as that evolves too. I think the next question is related back to my question. Are you aware of any NHLBI-led or NIH-led kind of boot camps or specific grant funding for learning the applications of AI?
Well, noted. we'll note that people are quite interested because we're interested too. So there's no upcoming ones. It's on our radar, but we don't know how we're going to implement that yet. But we do have certain training that's already available, right? So it's easier for us to think about how are we incorporating this into the existing training programs. But it's different to say, like, how are we expanding that more broadly or creating a brand new initiative? So as part of NHLBI, we do plan to have some of that, but unclear what form it will take. And so if you're looking for, is there going to be an upcoming one at the end of this year? Probably not, but note it, and we'll see if we can get something started before too long.
Great. We have a follow-up question from one of our program officers regarding the breast cancer risk prediction. Did it include the standard genetic approaches like PAM50, or are they only for recurrence? Are you familiar with the paper?
I'm familiar with the paper, not so much with all, but I can tell you that they did compare it to some other whatever is used clinically. I will not even try to guess what the names are since I am not a breast cancer researcher. But I do know that they're coming up with people who like it's prospective. So they're taking routine mammograms, which we have the advantage that there's a lot of routine mammograms, right, for women. And so these are not people with a history of breast cancer, like any type of risk necessarily. And if you think about it, this is different when you're trying to say, let's look at 5 years ahead of time, right? And so there's absolutely no sign in the image that there is breast cancer. If a clinician is looking at these, they would be like negative and then move on. But what they're showing is that no, actually a computer algorithm can look through this image, which apparently has no breast cancer, and say, oh, it looks like this person will predict. Unclear why it's making that prediction. And they do use some clinical factors in it, but it's still not what a person can do. So it's not about recurrence. This is just people with no history of breast cancer whatsoever, no signs in an image, but prediction that they will develop it within 5 years.
Great. So I guess I have another question, and maybe it'll be one of those I don't know, but the Catalyze program is both focused on new innovations of the technology, and as you kind of have you seen any instances of using AI to kind of help with that other end of the pipeline, as far as like potential go-to-market strategies and kind of more the business side of biomedical research?
Can you repeat the question? Something about business or translation of findings?
Yeah, so I think I'm a little choppy, unfortunately. So I was thinking, in addition to AI for helping identify new novel therapeutics or, these screening tools, has it also been used to kind of help better understand the potential market and kind of adoption rates, I guess?
The adoption rates of AI itself? Or
no. If you had a technology, have you seen instances where AI is helping small businesses or companies better understand where their technology fits within the existing marketplace and how to hone that strategy?
So yes, I have seen that informally. I have not seen papers about that, but yes, I have seen people, because let's say before, if people needed to do a market surveillance, it says like, how many Google hits or what are the Google search terms for whatever it is that you're developing or related concepts. It used to be that somebody might have to do a lot of work to figure that out, or maybe use some Google tooling. But now you actually can use a tool like ChatGPT to say like, I need to do surveillance of this and that. And you can actually, I have seen people use them. I don't know how good they are. This was not a formal study, but it does seem like you can do a lot of queries and through deep research, at least things that are online, you can absolutely look up a lot of information. But I can't speak to how reliable they are and so on. But yeah, and for people are trying to come up with their own versions of, let's say, a GPT by feeding it in a whole bunch of regulatory documents and trying to get guidance. And then hopefully from there, you can go back to the documents and look up things. So yeah, there are practical ways that I would say people are using this, but yeah, I haven't seen a research study on any of it.
In fear that I am too choppy for everyone to hear, Kevin, could you come off mute and ask your question? It seems like a very interesting thought there.
Sure.
Would you mind?
So I was wondering if I put myself in the position of the health system or the hospital, I'm getting all this inbound of people who want to do pilots. And so how are they supposed to vet and organize which ones? They're kind of doing it in a bespoke fashion today. And so I was wondering, are there evals or data sets that can be used as benchmarks to help them prioritize and figure out which ones are performing adequately? And it seemed like this may be something that would benefit from an NIH-wide data sets.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's a lot there, and you're absolutely right. I think a lot of health systems, first of all, they don't even have the time, the funds, right, to start like what you're saying. Oh yeah, let's just do all these pilots. So they're looking for like somebody to come to them already with something that works, and that has high potential. And I would agree that
probably
it's
lots of claims that things work, so they have to vet
exactly.
which of those are.
It's amazing. And some of it is bespoke. That being said, some health systems are like, we're on AI. And so some of them are almost like a little too eager to, okay, we're doing AI. And so let's plop something in there and see, because we're advanced. And so I think it can go in both directions, right? But absolutely, like, I think it partly depends on the type of data, and that doesn't mean it's going to be a good thing, right? But I think some health systems are trying to use their own data. And I have seen some arguments that say like, well, maybe this algorithm doesn't work anywhere else, but if it works with our own patients, then who cares, right? Because we can at least improve the care of our own local patients. And so there's also that way of viewing algorithms, right? But I would say if you have a device, that's not going to be a good algorithm, or that's not a good way to go, because if you want to get your device out there to the whole country or the whole world, then just because it works in one health system isn't good. But that might be different for an ICU predictive model of, I don't know, sepsis or ARDS. But yeah, in terms of benchmarks data sets, like I agree. So some people are trying to release that, and the NIH one of them. I think, in fact, there was an NIH that came out of Office of the Director. A lot of people who develop AI are like, I don't want to clean these crazy data sets, and I don't know a lot about this disease, but just give me a data set and I'll do the AI for you. And then other people who collect data don't necessarily want to say, oh, I've curated this data set for people to do AI, and then I'm just going to plop it somewhere. So Bridge to AI was an initiative that I think recognized that need and gave 4 awards for people to come up with good data, but also thinking about ethics, about how to share the data. And so, yeah, they had 4 particular projects. One was actually EHR ICU data. One was voice data. But yeah, whether those are still widely available or not is a whole nother question. So initiatives exist, but I would say we're not at the level where we would want to be. And that still wouldn't fully solve the problem of every single health system thinking about how they're going to do their own testing and vetting of models that are developed. But yeah. Great topic area there. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, great. So I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more. So John, I also see a very kind of interesting question there. Would you mind just coming off mute and asking so I don't have to read it?
Sure. Yeah, so thanks for that interesting presentation. So I'm just wondering if there would be any NHLBI effort in the area of medical record analysis. You know, a big challenge for many translational efforts is phenotyping patients in a reproducible way, either for enrollment or just to assess prospective impact. And AI seems to have great potential to dramatically improve the efficiency and reduce costs in that area. But I think we need a multi-institution effort to combine medical records, de-identify, et cetera. I know Epic recently published a COMET model that seems to be an effort in this area. I'm just wondering if the NHLBI is talking about this and might help coordinate this sort of effort.
Yeah, it's another great question. And yes, you betcha that we talk about that. So health data, EHR data has, and I say this having been in academic centers with a lot of electronic health record data, right? Like people do not necessarily want to share that because even if it's de-identified, it's sort of high, they view it as high risk, and they definitely view it as like their data that they need to protect and keep close. There are a few exceptions, right? Like Mimic is an example of a data that was originally ICU data, right, from Beth Israel Deaconess. And just so many people around the world have used Mimic data, right? There's certain data sets like that are just in widespread use. And COVID was another example of a time when people were willing to share EHR data, even though it was, data coming out of databases and sort of curated a little bit, but essentially EHR data. But yes, NHLBI, we are trying to expand. So we have our own ingested data for a lot of epidemiologic studies and some real world data in there, but it's not as in depth as we would like. And so we are trying to think about, is there real world data that we can get? Not CMS, because, you know, presumably people can get that through other venues, but can we get our own electronic health record data? Not because we want to own it, but to do precisely what you just talked about, right? Is there data that we can use? And related to the question that was just asked by Kevin is, can we use that as benchmark data for other people, right? Who are trying to test whatever it is that they have. But I think most of the times when we think about getting EHR data, it's coming in like bits and pieces and not really comprehensive electronic health record data. So we actually do talk about that a lot, but I don't have like a really concrete of like, yes, guess what? We have this data that we're about to make available in a week. So that's on our radar. And if you tell us a little bit more about your use case, we might have more specifics on what that is. A lot of the EHR data I would say that people are sharing, including the one collected by Bridge to AI, is ICU data. And that may not be the type of EHR data that everybody wants to use.
Great. So with that, I think we'll close this session. So thanks, Blanca, for again taking time out of your busy schedule running data science at the NHLBI to come chat with the group. I hope everyone enjoyed it. And Marissa, with that, I'll hand it back to you for the introduction of the next sessions.